So thank you very much for coming to the Microsoft VS Code workshop brought to you by Microsoft and CCSOC. So if you can see the current screen right now, here's a quick outline of how today's going to go. We have allocated 2 hours, however, we might finish a little early, or we might have some time to ask more questions if need be. There is the option, since this is a live event, that you can ask questions through this question answer system and vote on the questions. So every now and then I'll take a moment to have a look at the questions and answer any particularly popular questions, and also if there's something that's not clear, I can go over that bit again, and so on and so forth. So please feel free to use that Q&A functionality. It'll help you get the most out of this workshop. So a quick outline. So first I'll begin with a quick introduction about what VS Code is, about myself, about Microsoft, and then we'll go straight into learning how to use it, what features are offered, and how we can customize it. And for the remaining time after that, we'll work on building a basic extension. I'm assuming that there is no prior knowledge here, so we'll go from the very basics. It is required, since the extensions are to be written in JavaScript or TypeScript. So a basic understanding in either of those would definitely be useful. However, it's not integral. You can give it a go, see what works, see what doesn't, and learn from there. Cool. So a quick introduction about myself. My name's Adam. I am a software engineer at Microsoft for the past 6 months, and I recently graduated from UNSW Computer Science. So yeah, I've just been working here for the last 6 months, and I've very much enjoyed it. It's been a very good place to learn and also grow as an engineer, and have some impact on the world, essentially. So what we'll be dealing with today is VS Code. So for those who've never heard of VS Code before, it's essentially a text editor which is highly configurable, highly extensible, and best of all, highly customizable. So the great part is that if you want to change some part of the editor, you can, such as themes, such as how the editor behaves, what it looks like, that sort of thing, right? And the really cool part is you've got a bunch of extensions on offer, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a moment. Cool. Let us begin. Cool. So when you first boot it up for the first time, you'll see a page similar to this, a welcome page. And this gives us a bunch of options to start with. So such as creating a new file, opening a folder, as in opening a folder within the IDE so you can access the files within said folder, and also a workspace folder. And we'll get into that shortly, as well as a whole bunch of helpful tools such as stuff like keyboard shortcut cheat sheet, tips and tricks, videos to help use the IDE if that helps. You can also check out the VS Code GitHub repository. So if you find that you want to make improvements on it, or report a bug or that sort of thing, you can go there to do it, as well as like a newsletter to see what the newest changes are, what might be on the roadmap for the future. In addition, you've got a learning section down here, which is finding all the different commands on offer, commands being ways to invoke functionality within the editor, as well as stuff like how the interface itself, getting an understanding of it, and a short walkthrough even, which is pretty cool, as well as setting up stuff like different language support, key bindings, the theming, the colors, the colors of the IDE, the way the icons present, that sort of thing. Cool. So the way this this IDE presents files to you is through tabs up the top. So you can see that as well as the welcome tab, I've got another file open, workshop plan, markdown file. So I can switch between them and open up multiple files and access them through these tabs. But you might be wondering, well, how do I open up other files? Well, you've got a bunch of ways to do so. There, in the top left corner, assuming this is you've just installed it and haven't changed the locations of various things, the Explorer will be in the top left corner, indicated by these two pages. And here we get a bunch of options on on stuff like which files are open in an editor, which folders are opened, the outline, which we'll get into in a moment, and if you've installed JavaScript / TypeScript support, npm scripts. So we've got here an open editor, and this is one of the currently opened files. And this is also another way I can switch between different tabs. So if I've got a bunch of different files open at the same time and there's not enough to fit up here, you can also change them by viewing the open files here, which will be presented in a list. You've then got this section here where it says no folder opened. And we can do two things here. We can open a folder that we just look at, as in an existing folder that you can access the contents of inside Visual Studio, VS Code, which, if we can, check out a existing folder we have, it'll refresh itself and you've now got the folder that you've opened. If I wanted to have a look at the example C file I wrote, it's there. If I want to swap over to the plan, it's there. If I wanted to open, you might notice that when I clicked on each one, it didn't open a new one. What this is when the name here is italicized, it's in preview mode. So it won't open the full document, but it'll open up a preview of it so you can get an idea of what's in there. In order to completely properly open it up, we can just double click that instead. And now it's not italicized, then it's fully loaded. Same with another file. So now we've got both of these files accessible and we can navigate between them like so. In addition to being able to navigate between them through the Open Editors window, if that works better for you. So we've got here, we opened a folder, and that's all great and all. But what if I was working on an assignment, perhaps, such as I'm working on a comp course and I want to be able to see all the different folders I have associated with that course. This is where something called Workspaces comes in. So the idea behind a workspace is opening up a bunch of folders that might not necessarily all be in the same place and essentially grouping them together in terms of the IDE. They don't change locations on your file system, but from the IDE's perspective, you can group them together so they're all easily accessible from each other. So let's create a workspace now. Cool. So let's first close this. Cool. Oops. Let's open up a fresh instance of VS Code. I should screen share that again. Cool. Right, so we're back on a fresh screen. So I've now can add a workspace folder, and so I can add various workspace folders to this Explorer. Now, since we've only got one open, it only shows the one. But let's go to our terminal and let's create another few folders. So let's say if we're doing 1511 and 2041 at the same time, let's create some directories for that. I just realized that you're not sharing that screen. Leave me a moment. Okay, I'm just going to quickly create these files and then add them back here. Cool. So I've created 2 extra folders. So let's add them now. Added a 2041 folder and a 1511 folder. So now you'll notice that instead of having the workshop name up the top here, I mean, yeah, the original directory we opened, instead of having that name up top, we've now got an untitled workspace, as you can see here. So now we can customize our workspace. We've got 3 separate folders in this workspace currently. And if I wanted to make this persistent and group them together so I don't have to create them again every time I open up VS Code, I can go to File, Save Workspace As, and then we'll be presented with a little utility here to save it. So let's say I wanted to have a workspace particularly suited to this presentation. So I could go presentation.code workspace and save. And now you'll see that we've got our workspace named presentation. It's been marked as a workspace in the parentheses, and I've got my 3 folders associated with it. If I wanted to open up my example Perl document and then open up my C file, I can do that because they're all part of the same workspace, and I don't need to open up a new window or swap between different folders if I wanted to access both quickly and easily. Cool. Let's move on. So you'll now have some files opened and you've got a workspace set up. So here we've also got an outline. We've also got an outline heading here. So in cases where you've got, for example, some C functions, or if you're writing, some JavaScript and you've created a library class, you can. Oh, I've just been notified that you can't see pop-ups. Okay. That should be it for pop-ups. Stuff that were pop-ups were just like opening directories and saving workspaces in different places. Is the video feed restored? Okay, cool. Cool. So I see a question. What if save workspace? Oh, I see it. What if saved workspace as is grayed out? So in that case, so when it doesn't give you the option to save as a workspace, I'd make sure there's more than one folder opened in that workspace. The reasoning is because when it sees a single directory opened, it doesn't interpret that as a workspace because you've only got one directory opened at that time. So if it's grayed out, try adding some other directories to the workspace, and then hopefully it should work for you. Although if that still doesn't work, we can debug after this workshop. I see the question. So we're going to be using TypeScript instead of JavaScript. That's a very good question. We can use either. I can default to either if you'd like. So if there is a preference, do let me know, because I'm more than happy to do either. I see a question from Musa. Could you explain what containers are? I'm sorry, I'm not too sure what you mean by containers. Yeah, sorry. Cool. Let's continue on. So the one other cool thing you can do with workspaces as well, is you can actually configure settings specific to that workspace. And we'll go over that a little bit later when we talk about settings. So the outline here will give us the function signatures or class structures for, say, we're using C++ or JavaScript. It'll interpret that file and give us a very concise summary of the functionality available, such as what properties are in there, what methods are available, the names of different types, that sort of thing, which would be provided in outline. You can't see it here, but there is also a heading for if you're in a Git repository called timeline. And timeline is a really cool feature that lets you see the changes made to the specific file that you have opened across time. So say if I've been modifying a file in a Git repository and I wanted to see who made what changes and when, the timeline feature, which you can't see here but will appear when you're in a Git repository, will show up and show you that changes in what's called diff mode. It'll show you in red what's been removed and in green what's been added. There are also potentially extra headings here that won't be default, which are added when you have different extensions. So say, I added an extension which let me use some Docker functionality, which is containerization functionality. I have the ability to control that sort of thing from one of these headings as well. So different extensions can also add features to the Explorer to, have certain commands more easily accessible, so you don't have to keep swapping between screens to do such a thing. Cool. All right, let's move on to the search functionality. So search, which is indicated by the magnifying glass, which is the second from the top icon, is both a search feature as well as a search and replace feature. So what this means is I can search for a particular word or regular expression within a directory, specifically in this case within the workspace directory that we currently have open, and we'll search for contents. So if I wanted to search for, let's have a look at, if I wanted to search for this printf, let's close that and close this, and I want to search for all occurrences of printf in my current open workspace, I can type it in there and the result will come up, and it'll break it down first by directories within your workspace, then by the file, and then under that every occurrence within that file. So I see my result here, it's found printf, and I can click on it and it'll take me straight to that file, open it, and highlight the occurrence of that particular item that I was looking for. And we can also make our search a bit more complex by searching only for cases where we'd want a printf with, for example, a literal string. So in this case, we've got printf test, but we wouldn't be able to normally achieve that with a regular simple text search. We'd need a regular expression. So we can enable that using this icon here, which has a tooltip of use regular expression. And once we've enabled that, it highlights. And now if I want to go search printf for a item which, if there's a literal string, I can enter that query in. So in this case, I'm just going to do a very basic catch all. And here we go. So now we've got an expression for, using regular expressions, we've searched for a printf call that has a literal string in it rather than, passing in a variable that contains the string, for example. So we've got that power as well. And here, if we wanted to utilize the replace feature instead, let's say here, if we want to replace printf with, for example, sprintf. Two things happen here. It'll tell us before the change is made where that change is made. So here it'll actually tell us we've found that we've got an occurrence of printf and we want it to be replaced to sprintf. Here's the occurrence of it and here's what is changing. So in this case, I can double click on that entry and it'll show me what changes. So in this case, in the red, this is in diff mode, by the way. It'll show in red what's being modified or removed, and in green what's being added. So we've got a more visual representation of what's being changed in this replace mode. So let's have that happen. So we can make this happen by using this little icon here, which is replace, and it'll make it happen. Cool. Let's correct that because I haven't put the right hash included there. So next we'll go on to source control. So in this case, there is no, I haven't initialized the Git repository. So what I'll do is I'll initialize one now. Real quickly. Cool. So I've now initialized the Git repository off screen, and we now can control our Git functionality from here. So we've added these 4 files. For example, spoiler alert. So we've added, for example, the workshop plan. We've got the markdown file here. It shows that it's all added because this is all new content. And I can specify, like opening this file to view the diff, like we've got here, undoing this change, discarding, so getting rid of it. So this would be equivalent to like git remove. You can then stage these changes, so the equivalent of git add. And it also tells us this is what's with, like, for example, we've got a U here, which tells us that this file is untracked as of yet. So if I wanted it to be tracked so that version control can monitor the progress of how this file changes over time, I add it for the first time. And now, if we hover over it, we can see index added. So now when I commit, so I can commit here by entering a commit message, and by default it'll commit to the default branch that was created. So I could type here adding preliminary workshop plan. And so this is my git commit message now. And if I click the tick up top, it'll perform the commit. Sorry. Okay, I need to configure this for use with a rule repository, but in this case you can see, like, you can commit from this, and included we can access this 3-dot menu here and have a couple of other options that we'd like to do. So let's say we wanted to swap to another branch on this Git repository. We click checkout, and if we want to create a new branch, let's call this branch develop. Okay, it's giving us a little bit of grief because this is the first commit and we can't branch from no commits, but that's how we'd add a branch there. If we wanted to pull, push, even rebase. So rebase is basically replaying various commits from a branch onto another, as well as changing, merging branches, pushing branches, etc., as well as just showing Git output from the operations that we run through Git. Cool. Cool part is as well is that it will support this source control window will support other versions of source control. So if we've got an SVN repository, Mercurial repository, or TFS, it will support all of them. Although some of the other ones you might need to add an extension for, but these are usually also published by Microsoft as well. Cool. In the case where you've got a, sorry, let me get rid of this. So in the case where you've got multiple directories in a workspace and each have their own corresponding Git repository, the source control here will also break it down by those workspace directories as well. So if I'm maintaining multiple Git repositories at the same time, it'll show me the state of all of them at the same time. So if I've got some unstaged changes, or if I haven't made a commit in one place, it'll notify me. Cool. Let's see, let's have some questions. Cool. Okay, it looks like JavaScript is preferred for the extension, so we'll use JavaScript. Cool. So after source control, we've got debugger, or more specifically, the run window, which can also perform some debugging. So let's say we've got some C file that we want to run. We can have our C file open, and you might be wondering, how do I configure this for my specific project? The cool thing is that you can essentially configure whatever commands you want to run. So the way we utilize this is creating a launch.json file, and you can specify on which workspace directory to install this to. So in this case, let's put one for 1511. I want to use the GDB version of I want to use the standard version for C compiler, and I want to use GCC, the standard C compiler. So let's, so we've created the compiler here, we created the launch.json here, and here's where we can tell it how to either compile or execute or both. So in this case, for example, the program is what I'd want to be running. So is what I want to be running when I click launch. So if we type in our command, call it build. Cool. So it will run our GCC command here. It's expecting a debugger to be attached. But here's how we would, make that call. Obviously, you might have to configure some system settings to allow the debug to attach, because some operating systems may have some protections in place. But obviously do that at your own risk. So let's move on for now. So that is how you would normally create some custom scripts to build, attach the debugger to said build and run it, so you can create some breakpoints and continue debugging your code, finding out is there something I've forgotten here, is there a bug in here, etc. And you can also set breakpoints by pressing just left of the line number until you see a little red circle. So when you run that debugger, this will create a breakpoint at that location, and once that breakpoint's hit, the debugging window will bring you here and you can step through it. Now we've got extensions. So here we've got a bunch of extensions that one are currently installed, as well as recommended. And you can see like for example, the top one here, the name of the extension, what version it's at, a short description, and the publisher. So in this case, this Docker extension is published by Microsoft. You can click onto it and get a bit of information about that extension itself, such as, how many downloads, how well it's rated, and some information about the extension itself. And the great thing that I like about Windows, about VS Code, is there's a lot of extensions. There's so many extensions, and the cool thing is they're mostly open source as well. So do keep in mind there are some closed source ones, but a very great majority of them are open source as well. So if you wanted to make improvements on said extension, or learn how they work, how they approach things, you can also check that out as well. And you can do that by clicking onto the repository item here, which will take you to the kind of repository that is linked to it. So it might maybe Git, but it might also be something else, right? So it'll take you to that. Cool. Do note though that yes, you can install extensions by just clicking the install button. However, there are also some which you might require restarting VS Code in order for them to fully take effect. So in most cases, such as language extensions or color schemes, will usually load instantaneously, so you don't even have to close out of VS Code and reopen it. They'll just be applied automatically. However, some more complex ones may need to be. Cool. Now we've got, let's have a look at some questions. Cool. So I see a question from Brittany. What's the difference between a staged and unstaged change? So this is more of a Git question, but it's essentially referring to a unstaged change is a change which has been made in a tracked file, a file that you've added before to the Git repository tracking, but it hasn't been, the changes haven't been added to the next commit. So a staged change is a change that was made after the previous commit and it will be added to the next one. So hopefully that answers that question. Cool. So that's the main items here. You might notice I've got another one down here with extensions. Some of them will contextually appear in this sidebar when you've added them. So for example, I've got a to-do extension, I should say, installed, and it's added its icon here so I can quickly access it, either contextually if I'm modifying a to-do file, or globally if I want to have a look at different to-do statements I've written across different directories in a workspace. So they'll also add their icons here. And the cool thing is you can hold them and move them around. So if you access, the Git operations the most and want them to be ahead of your Explorer, you can. You can make it look the way you want it to look. Make it, what's comfortable for you. Cool. So the next thing is sync settings, or settings syncs, I should say. So VS Code also gives you the ability to associate an account with your current workspace and user configuration settings. And it'll actually synchronize it across other instances of VS Code, either on the same machine, across different other machines, or even different other users on the same machine, so that you can basically feel like you're back at home, or back, in your setup with all your settings that you've made. it takes over time, you change a bunch of settings to suit more the way you work, and it would be quite annoying to have to move to another machine or reinstall VS Code, and all of a sudden all your configurations over the past few months or years are just gone. So this allows you to back them up and synchronize them so that whenever you log on to an instance of VS Code with that account, you've got all your settings right there. You can just go straight into it. Cool. So let's see if there are any. Cool. Looks like there's no new questions. Okay, cool. Cool. Let's go on to the next one. So, going back to the plan, let's now talk about customizing VS Code. So, with this editor, you've actually got a lot of settings that you can configure. Now, some of the most obvious ones would be like, I want to have my syntax to be highlighted using a certain color scheme. I want to have different icons. I want to have a different background color, for example. And VS Code will let you do such a thing. So let's delve into the settings first of all. And you can see that with the gear icon down the bottom, which has a tooltip of manage. So you can click onto there, and you've got a bunch of options. So let's see, the first one is the command palette. And what this is essentially, imagine a command line where you have to call specific commands with some parameters and it does something. Same idea here, except it's specifically VS Code functionality. So say that I wanted to, let's say, add a line comment. It will take effect, right? It will take effect. And another thing it will do is it'll actually tell you, the keyboard shortcut associated with that command. So now that I've found out, oh cool, I can comment out a line here, and it's got an associated keyboard shortcut, let's try it out. So it's using a chord referring to a combination of keyboard shortcuts. So Command K, Command C. So then we can go Command K, Command C, and it runs that same command, right? Instead of having to go down to manage, click the command palette, and then run it, right? This is also how we're going to be calling our extension functionality later, but we'll get to that. A shortcut to access that as well is Command-Shift-P if you're on a Mac, or Control-Shift-P if you're on Linux or Windows. So the settings itself. So the settings of VS Code itself can be accessed through that manage gear as well. So one thing that's pretty useful here is this search bar. I can search for any particular keyword in this entire set of settings. So if I wanted to, find, let's say, if I wanted to find the cursor style, for example, I could type in cursor, and it'll now give me a breakdown of the user settings relating to the cursor. So in this case, if I wanted to have my cursor always stay solid, so it doesn't blink, if I wanted to set the style, for example, I could set the style to be block, right? As well as filtering out those categories using that keyword. So if I wanted to look at the cursor settings specifically for the text editor functionality, I can, click that category and see the cursor related settings, or whatever keyword you choose to use here. So it's quite useful in not only searching for settings, but narrowing down that particular setting for a particular portion of the editor, such as the text editor or even settings relating to the cursor in an extension. Another interesting thing is you can not only synchronize it, so here we've got settings sync to associate your editor's settings with an account so that it always remains consistent, but you can also configure your settings contextually. What this means is if I wanted a setting to apply to any time I use this particular instance, that's the user's settings. But if stuff like this would be such as color schemes or like, for example, the font size. But if I wanted to have a specific set of settings for a particular workspace, say my workspace is primarily in, for example, C, and I wanted to always have 4 spaces as my tab rather than 2 spaces, I could set a specific setting just for that workspace. And keep in mind, when you set that workspace setting, here it will apply to the currently live workspace. So do keep that in mind. In addition, you can even specify it by folder. So in this particular workspace, I could have different settings catering to my C code for 1511 and then my Perl code for 2041, for example. So you can narrow down the settings even to particular workspace folders. So that's pretty cool. It gives you a lot of control about your particular environment, so you can customize it to exactly the way you want it. Cool. In addition, if you install some extensions that have their own settings, they'll appear under the extensions category. So say if you've got like a Vim, because I know that might be a common editor, you can even narrow down the settings for particular extensions relating to the keyword that you've given. So in this case, I've got my cursor keyword, and I can look at settings specifically relating to the cursor for the Vim extension, for example. So it's pretty cool. Keyboard shortcuts. So you've got another item in the settings gear called keyboard shortcuts. And this will essentially give you a very descriptive breakdown of all the different commands, what key binding they're associated with, and even their context. So like, for example, let's consider add cursor above. It tells us, okay, this is the functionality. Add a cursor above if you want to do multi-line editing. It tells you how to invoke it using the specific key binding that it's set to, although do keep in mind that can be configured as well. And it also tells you when that shortcut can take effect. So you can configure some key bindings to occur only when you're editing a file, rather than looking through the extensions or looking through your workspace. So you've got quite a bit of flexibility and customization there as well. You can also, if you right-click onto a key binding, you can also find whether there are any conflicting ones. So using show same key bindings, or change what it is, change when you want that key binding to be active, or even remove it. So that's cool as well. So you can see that if when I clicked show same key bindings, 3 entries for the same key binding actually pop up. But the interesting thing here is they all have different when statements. So I could have the same key binding for multiple commands, but all have them occur in different contexts. So, for example, I can add cursor above, for multi-line editing when the editor is in focus. But I could also use Vim's multi-line editing, for example, if that's enabled and if Vim is active, because it's got a different when statement, and it'll prioritize the when statement that's more specific. So pressing Option Command up while Vim is active will override the top one. Cool. Cool. So another feature that you can configure is snippets, or specifically user snippets. So when I click on user snippets, I can say that I want to create a new snippets file specifically for my C code in comp1511. So let's give it a file name, comp1511 snippets, and it creates one for us. So it'll give you a simple one here, like just an example code here. And I can start configuring. So let's change this. So we don't want it to apply to JavaScript, we want it to apply to C. And we want the activation word, or the word that invokes this particular snippet, to be, let's say, PRI. So we're going to make this create printf. So let's go printf, like so. And let's leave the description the same because printf will log it there. We need to make sure we escape our double quotes so that the snippets file is happy. Now let's go to our C file. So I can go PRI, and what you'll notice, it hasn't replaced it yet, but the first option in our suggestions is the snippet we just created. Once we click it, it'll perform the replacement, and I can add my print statement, hello world, like so. So if you wanted to create your own snippets, that's how you can do so as well. And it's quite nice. It's quite easy to set up. And the cool thing is that if I wanted to add another one, just copy this, name it, to do something else. So say if I wanted to, what else do I want to do? If I want to create an if statement, and I just want to have my prefix be if, let's create our if statement, have it default to creating the brackets in the first set of parentheses. We can go back. Oops. And it'll give us the suggestion for that if statement and create it for us. Cool. So, theming. So we can also customize the way VS Code looks. And we've got two ways of achieving this. A color theme, so this will be the particular colors and accents utilized throughout the program, as well as file icons. So if I click color theme, which is also the chord KT, it will bring up this drop-down menu here. And one really neat thing that I quite like is if I wanted to see an example of how everything would look with different color themes, I can just switch to another color theme without clicking enter and committing to it to see what it would look like. So I can go through each of them and check them out, see what works, see what doesn't. And another useful thing is if you prefer light themes, it actually groups light themes and dark themes. So if I am just interested in, for example, dark ones, I can go straight to them and know which ones are which. That being said, if none of them suit your fancy, we've got other options. Down the bottom of this particular window, or this particular drop-down window, we've got the option to install additional color themes, and that'll bring up the extensions page with a filter specifically for themes. So you can now check through them and get an example of them. So this one's specifically for icons. Let's like material theme, for example. So we can go through this and check out, this theme looks nice, for example, and we can install it. So it'll take a quick moment. And now it specifically brought us to all the options for the material theme. So let's say if I want to use the darker high contrast one, I can select it, and now that's applied. And I can go back to my code, and that theming is already applied. Likewise, what I can also extend this further if I wanted to install an icon theme. So for example, we've got the material theme icons, so the associated icon pack, and I can go to my settings, file icon theme, and it'll actually, if I set this up correctly, also preview the different icons, just like you would with a theme. So I can go through each of the different icon themes that are installed and see how they look. So in this case, let's go with the material set, and now we've got a consistent theme and icon set. So there's a lot of options. There's a lot of options, and try what works for you. One other thing as well, you've also got to check for updates. Item down the bottom. So one other neat thing about VS Code is it's updated quite often. So it's usually a lot of bug fixes, a bunch of new features. So if something's not behaving right, or there's always updates coming out. So cool, keep it up to date. Let's see if there are any questions. Were there any other questions? Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll just take like a 10-minute break or so, just to have a quick break, get some water, whatnot, and I'll see everyone back at 4:10, so in 10 minutes time. From there, we'll have a quick look at writing a basic extension, so how we can implement our own required functionality that we want to add. So yeah, cool. I'll see you all in 10 minutes. All right, cool. So it's 4:10. Let's carry on. So let's get into writing an extension. I saw that there was a question that came through about must-use extensions, VS Code. What I'll probably do is I'll go through that a little after this, so you can go through all that. Cool. All right, let's share my screen. Cool. All right. Do let me know if you can't see my screen. You should see the whole thing now. Cool. So, in order to create an extension, we first have to go and check out this link. So, what I'll do is I'll copy this and put this here. Just make it a bit, oops, that's too much. So this is the link I'm referring to. It's about the Visual Studio, in this case, Visual Studio Code's first extension API, which will create a few things for us. So in order to do this, we need to have npm installed, which is a popular JavaScript package manager. And we install a package called yearman with VS Code's extension generator functionality. So let's copy that. So let's go to our directory now. So we're now at our directory here. Let me make this bigger actually, so you can see. And let's run the command npm install. So it'll start installing it. I've already got it installed, but We'll just go through this just right now. Cool. So hopefully when you've installed it, should get all ticks here, just making sure that everything is set the way it should be. And if we've got everything looks all right, we're ready to go. So let's move this over here. We can type in VSCode to invoke this generator to specifically create a VS Code extension. So we can go VSCode and we'll get some options in a moment. So here's where we can start configuring things. So if I wanted to have a new extension, so specifically in either TypeScript or JavaScript, for the purpose of this, we'll be going with JavaScript. Or if I wanted to create a new color scheme theme, or a new package of code snippets, a new key mapping, I can. So in this case, we want to create a JavaScript extension. We want to give it a name. So let's call this simple file info extension. Give it an identifier, usually the same name, and description is an extension which provides some simple file information upon saving. So let's go changing the contents of the file. Cool. Enable JavaScript type checking. Let's default that to no, and let's initialize it as a Git repository. I personally use Yarn, but you can use either npm or Yarn depending on your preferences. It won't change either way. Let it run, let it download all the dependencies that it needs to download. And cool. So now when we go to, you'll notice that it's created a directory with the same name. Let's enter that directory. Oops. And you'll see the files that it's generated for us. So now let's open up VS Code into that directory. Let's go ctrl O. Let's go into this directory. Let's save our changes. So now we've opened up our extension. So here we've got a bunch of directories. Okay, cool. So here we've got extension.js. So it's this file as well as the package.json, which will give us the ability to configure all this. So in the package.json file, we have, let me move that there. We have all of our settings. So if we want to change the name of our extension, we can, as well as what it's displayed as. So the difference between name and display name is just the name is, it's more identifiable name. So these would have to be unique across like all the extensions altogether. Whereas the display name is what it'll be displayed as. So in this case, let's name it to simple file info. As well as setting the description, we can also set what the minimum version of this extension for VS Code should be, what category we want it to live in. So you might have remembered that when we searched for a theme, we could specify a category. So like, for example, if we wanted specifically a color theme, I could narrow it down to just the category of themes. Likewise, if I wanted some, let's say, key maps, I could search for that. And that is all declared in this section here. So in this case, we're in other. Let's leave it in other for now. But that'll basically put it into that category, so it might be easier to search. We've then got a couple of other pretty important items here, specifically these three. So you've got the entry point, i.e. the start or whatever JavaScript file that is being called first, so our entry point. So in this case is extension.js here. All right, it runs the activate and deactivate commands. Activate when the extension is being started and deactivate when it's being closed. You might have noticed I was talking about activation and deactivation. This is important for us because we don't want our extension functionality running all the time. We want to be able to invoke it. So we can use the onCommand feature as our activation event. So by default, it defaults the commands to hello world. And in the contribute section, we associate that onCommand with the name of that command. Okay, so let's call it get simple file info. And yeah, so here are some other dependencies that it pulled in, as well as some linting information. The scripts that are run for this particular JavaScript package. So let's actually zoom out a little bit. Oh, here we go. And before we start changing things, let's just have a quick read through what we're looking at. So extension.js is our entry point. And what it'll do is when this particular extension is activated, activating meaning the extension is loaded and available, it will run this command. It will run this function. What it will do next is we've got a special method called register command. And you might notice its first parameter, so we can check what the parameters are by hovering over the function. In this case, it takes a string, the command it's registering to, as well as the callback being the code that's being executed when that command is run. And you'll notice this command here is the same name of the command we register here. So they all need to be the same in order for VSCode to recognize, hey, this is the command and this is the function that's registered to that same name. And here we've got a method which says show information message. So this will just show us a little pop-up saying hello world from my extension. So let's give this a run. Now, in order to run this, you need to have, you can do it in two ways. If you've got the extension file open, you can press F5 and it'll open up a new window. Specifically, I'm not sure, let me see if I can get rid of this. Nope. There we go. Cool. It will specifically say extension development host. So that's how you'll be able to tell which instance of VS Code is running your extension. So let's close that just real quick. You can also run it by clicking, so say you're in your Explorer, by clicking run. And you've got a drop down here which talks about various run operations. In this case, extension.js is the only thing I've got open, so it defaults to run extension. So then I can click the play button and it'll do the exact same thing as pressing F5. It'll invoke it with, it'll invoke a fresh instance with no configurations applied to VS Code. So let's open the workshop workspace that we created earlier. And let's go into our test.c that we created earlier. Let's get that away. So this is our file. Now, you might have noticed we haven't gotten a hello world from the extension that has been created for us. And that's because we have not run it yet. So if I go and open up the command palette, so remembering you can either open it from the settings window or Command-Shift-P, Control-Shift-P if you're working on Windows or Linux, and it'll give you the command window. So we've got two choices here. We could try and guess the name, or we could go get, hold on a second. Whoops. Get simple file info. So that's the name that we assigned earlier. And now it brings up the informational pop-up saying hello world from simple file info extension. Great. So let's go back, and you'll notice it also gives us a debugging console. So it tells us that we've hit this line because it's printed out to the console, so we know that it's actually been activated. And this message has been given to us. So now let's change this message. Let's say hello world from the Microsoft CCSOC workshop. Let's click save. And now that we've made a change, we need a rerun. So we need to restart the extension. And we can achieve that in one or two ways. We can either press the stop square and then restart it like we did before, or we can use the restart command. So if I click restart, it will shut down the existing extension, restart it, and now if we go back, we can call our command again, and it's changed the contents of the message. Cool. So now we can output whatever messages we'd like. So having hello world statements is great and all, but we want it to do something now. We want it to do something a bit more interesting. So our simple file info extension, for the aim of this particular workshop, so do keep in mind this is more for demonstration purposes and might not be the most efficient way about approaching it, but this is just for simplicity. So let's get rid of that. What we want to do is whenever we save this document, we want to have a message that tells us you've got this many characters in your file. So, just giving us some metrics. So how can we do this? Well, you might be thinking, well, how do you just know what commands to run? Well, how do you know what functionality is available? If we navigate to the VSCode API, this will actually tell us all the different functionality available that we can utilize to customize our extension. So if we want to be able to invoke our extension functionality when a document's been saved, a document being whatever file is currently open, we can navigate to Workspace. So all the parts of the API have been broken down into various categories. So in this case, we want Workspace because this relates to changes made in the workspace. If we navigate all the way down to on did save text document, it tells us an event that is emitted when a text document is saved to disk. Now, what it means by event is saying it's the idea that when actions are made within VS Code, it notifies the rest of the program saying, hey, we've just saved a file, or this file has been modified, or we've closed this file, for example. So what we can do is use this on did save text document to listen to the part of VS Code that emits the notification saying, hey, this file has been closed, or this file has been saved, and get some information about that and use it. So let's use that. Let's go back to here. Cool. So in order to register this, we've got to use the VS Code part and go to Workspace. So notice how this Workspace category is the same as the Workspace category in the API list. So it gives you sort of a breakdown of where this function lives as well. So we want to use on did save text document, and it'll give us a tooltip saying, here's what this particular method requires. So we require a function that performs our action, as well as any other arguments. So in this case, we want our event, keeping in mind this is of the text document type. Actually, instead of event, let's do some better naming. Let's call this document to be more indicative of what's actually in this object. Cool. So let's first, before we start implementing the actual functionality, let's verify that this particular method is being invoked at the right time. So let's just have a show information message saying document has been saved, just to verify that this particular method gets invoked at the right time. So let's restart our extension, reload. We have to activate it to get simple file info. So notice how now it doesn't give us the message there because we've told it to invoke at a different time. So let's say if I make 2 printfs of hello world and save, we've got our tooltip down the bottom, document has been saved, which is what we wrote here. Cool. So we now know that our on did save text document callback is being invoked at the right place, the place we wanted it to be. Awesome. Let's get into making this extension. So we want to be able to analyze this text file and determine how many ASCII characters there are. So in this case, we're just going to be referring to this standard ASCII alphabet. So A to Z rather than the Unicode version, just for simplicity here. So let's get this, and we can get the text of this document using the getText method. Now this here requires a range object. So let's create that range object. Text range equals new VSCode range. And this just tells us what line to start and what line to end at for this range. So in this case, we want to have the whole file. So let's, for the sake of this, let's limit this to only work on files with 1,000 lines. We can pass in that text range to here, and this will output the text of the document. So let's save that. Let document text equal this here. And we want to normalize our text, so we want to just account for lowercase. So converting all uppercase text to lowercase, just to make our lives easier. Cool. So now in this method here, in this string here, we've actually got the entire contents in one string of the document that we just saved. So let's now split this up. I'm going to create a variable here to keep track of our characters. And let's now use split to split by each individual character. And for each of them, each individual character, let's go element here. Let us get the first letter. Oops, I think. So let's get the first letter just in case. And start filtering. So if letter is greater than or equal to A and letter is less than or equal to Z, and we know that this will encapsulate all alphabetical characters because we've converted everything to lowercase beforehand. And add to our character frequency variable that we're using to keep track. And just so that we don't crash halfway through. If we get an exception, let's log it. Just in case something might go wrong. Now, in a more polished extension, you want to do something with this so that you can, repair whatever error state you're in or recover from this. But for this, for the purpose of this demonstration, we'll just log it. Cool. Okay. So now we've got in character frequency a count of all the letters that we've counted in our particular saved document. We do not yet show the user this information, so let's put that together now. So let's create a file info string and log our character count to the user. Character frequency, finish constructing our string, and now we pass in our constructed string file info to the show information message. So what we've done here essentially is gotten the text document from the onDidSave text document call. We've specified what lines of that particular document we want to get, so the first 1,000 lines. We've gotten all the text from it, counted every single letter that we've come past, counted it into character frequency, and then showing that to the user. Cool. And now it comes up with our total letter count, our character count here. And we can verify that this is working. So if I add A, B, C, D, our character count should go up by 4, which it has. Right? So if you're, let's say you're creating a more polished extension and you want to verify that there are no regressions in your code, or if you're making an addition, you want to make sure that it doesn't break something else, you'd also include tests here rather than just manually verifying that it works. So I would highly, highly encourage you to do that in addition to the extension, so that you also have, the peace of mind that that your extension behaves exactly how you'd like it to. And I would also strongly encourage taking a look through all the various options that are available in the VSCode API. You can do a lot of really cool stuff with it and automate a bunch of things, because you can even orchestrate Kubernetes clusters. Sorry, you can even orchestrate Kubernetes clusters through VSCode. So there's such a, I think there's quite a really good ecosystem, and there's so much out there that shows off all the different functionality available for a Visual Studio Code extension. So I highly, highly recommend taking a look at how other people approach it and, learn something, try something out. If you think that there's like a piece of functionality missing and, you want to try and implement that and add that to VS Code, go ahead, try it through an extension. Who knows? It might even be so well received, you could eventually have it be part of VS Code later in the future. You never know. So give it a go. It's definitely a very good learning experience as well, and it's allowing you to make what you want out of it and extend it the way you want it to be, which I just think is really cool. That's pretty much all from me. if there are any further questions, I'd be like, we've got another 20 minutes left. I'm happy to answer some questions if you'd like, either about VS Code, about Microsoft, or if you have any questions about like, yeah, that sort of thing. I'm more than happy to remain here. I'll be here till 5 o'clock. So if you do have questions, please, like, feel free to. Yep, I see Akhil's question. That's a good question. So Akhil asks, can you tell us about a few really good must-use extensions for VS Code? I guess it does come down to personal preference. However, let's have a look. I like keeping track of whenever you're like working on something and you write a little note to yourself to do this, do that. There exists, let me try and find the exact name of it. There exists an extension, it's called To Do Plus. I personally use it quite a bit. It helps me keep track of to-do lists. Keeping in mind, I'm giving these recommendations as a individual, not representing Microsoft in this case. That one's pretty useful. Stuff like Microsoft's C++ extension that brings in like automated compilation and a thing called IntelliSense to the project itself, I find it's very useful because it gives you code suggestions for like a C and C++ project, which might not be as, which would take a lot of time out of searching, so it's pretty useful. What are some others? Key mappings. So I personally, especially during my uni days, got very familiar with the Vim key mappings, but this is more for in general. You do have quite a bit of key mappings available, so if you want to try out, if you're familiar with Vim and want to move to VS Code but like the way Vim feels and all that, there's a compatibility layer for that. The one I use is VS Code Vim. However, Microsoft does also implement a bunch of other key mappings as well, such as like Sublime Text, if you're very used to using Sublime, Notepad++. If you really like Nano, for example, and want to have Nano's key bindings, but in Visual Studio, that exists. Even Emacs, like that's the cool thing about all these extensions is if you find a gap where no one's made this cool thing, you could go ahead and create it. What are some other ones? To be perfectly honest, I don't actually use that many extensions. I don't mind just the basic installation of VS Code itself. I guess another cool one would be being able to view PDFs within the IDE. That's pretty useful, especially like if you're working on a programming assignment and they've published the spec in a PDF file. You can view that while working on your assignment, for example. Yep, Kai's just mentioned GitLens and the Vim extension. Yeah, they're pretty good. GitLens, yeah, let's have a look at GitLens. I think I've got that installed. Yeah, so GitLens is another approach at incorporating Git into VS Code. So like if you take a look at the extension page, it'll show you line by line, who's modified what, how long ago, which is pretty cool. Yeah, it's what I really like about it is there's so much. There's extensions that cover and add things that you wouldn't even have thought were missing, but then you can't live without it once you've added it. So honestly, Akil, what I might like and what you like, and what we'd both consider to be must use might even just differ between us. So there are very commonly used extensions which you can view through the extensions tab, but honestly just try different ones and see what works for you. So make it what you want to be. Try and figure out what you like about it, what you want it to be, I guess would be where I'd end that. I can see from Michael, can you go through which extensions you use? Honestly, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 11 extensions installed, and half of them are themes. So I'm probably not the best person to ask, but I guess I can go through what I do use. I do use the Docker control extension. So say you've got some Docker files or even Docker Compose files, it will help you, like for example, run builds of that Docker Compose or Docker file. It will provide suggestions or autocompletes for Docker files, which is very useful, especially if you can't remember what the arguments for a particular command are. So I found that's really useful. And you can also build images and run the images straight from VS Code, which is super cool, as well as debugging those images. So you can actually attach your terminal shell to said image and control it from there, which is fun, which takes a lot of the confusion out of manually doing it through command line, and lets you just do it at the click of a few buttons. So I think that's really cool as well. And I definitely made a lot of use out of that one. Other extensions, I guess, would just be like particular language compatibilities extensions. For example, the Python one. If you want to have some linting take place for your Python projects, you can actually. I'm pretty sure you can also, through this extension, apply some boilerplate code. So if you want to create some tests, some unit tests, you can generate those files. I think you can also create a Jupyter notebook from it. I believe so. So yeah, different language extensions as well are very, very useful and add a bunch of really useful features to make the development lifecycle more rapid, so you'll become more efficient and that sort of thing. But yeah, I do apologize. I don't really install many extensions, unfortunately. Are there any other questions? Yes, I definitely agree, Michael. The live server is very, very useful. And that reminds me, actually, there is live sharing. I believe it's in a beta stage right now, but live sharing your VS Code instance is quite a new feature that VS Code has released recently. And it's great if you want to work on, for example, a group project where you want everyone to be using the same environment, accessing the same web server as if you're in the same room, which might be useful, considering today's considering the pandemic situation. You might find it useful, help productivity when working on a group assignment, for example. Yeah. I believe there's also, I haven't used it personally, but I believe there's also like, if you're doing front-end web dev work for React, I think there's even like component previews. I'm not too sure, I haven't personally used them. Yeah. So yeah, there's honestly like, there's so much to it, and it's grown a lot, especially recently. So I would suggest, like, if you want to learn about more about the functionality and the features that are available to you, that you can, you know, leverage upon and work more efficiently, or take a lot of tedious actions and automate them, like, just, I guess, read through that documentation and give it a go. Like, one thing that I very much think is an important thing for a developer or for an engineer is just giving things a go, seeing, like, if you've never done something before, try it out, see how you go. If you make it work, great. Now build upon it. But if you don't make it work, continue to try. You might figure it out. You might figure out what was missing, or learn something about the particular language or framework that you're working on, and grow as an engineer. Like, most importantly, growing as an engineer, so you know you can achieve more. That's something which I do very much. I think is a very valuable thing. I guess, are there any other questions? We do have another 7 more minutes. If there are no further questions, I guess we can wrap it up there. Unless anyone else has any other questions. Okay, cool. Oh, thanks, Michael. And that's one thing. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present today. It's pretty cool being able to, like, be on the other end of the workshops now, as being a previous UNSW computer science student. And I just hope that, you know, I hope that we've all learnt something today, something useful. And yeah, well, I hope we've all grown even a little bit as engineers today. And most importantly, I hope you found it interesting. And do, like, if you have any feedback, if there's things that, you know, we could have done better today, or if you think was missing or that we could add to, please do let either myself or Michael or know, because, like, we'll definitely take that feedback in stride and, you know, try and improve further workshops or events in the future. So yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity, and I hope you all have a great day.